Traders, how are you? With Marcello. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. Not a whole lot of market news this week, but we do have a lot of international artificial intelligence news. They've developed a way to see through walls with Wi-Fi routers so they could actually see where you are with AI. And now they're developing new robots that are going to take care of people because people have to eat and sleep and stuff. So now they have AI robots. So if you're working in that job, it's going to take your job too. Let's go ahead and get started. Not a whole ton of market news or economic news, let's say. We have a few inflation points throughout mostly South Korea, for example, and Thailand. We also have a little bit of news when it comes to the oil, but not a whole lot of market news per se. Like I mentioned in the beginning to you guys, that the biggest piece of news is the artificial intelligence, how it can see through walls now and know exactly where you are, because they obviously wouldn't abuse that for any reason. Next lockdown, we see you're in your living room. You can't go out. Don't go to the bathroom. All right, so U.S. markets overall negative. Canada was mostly negative as well. The markets in Europe also were negative. They had a little bit of a sharp drop on Thursday with some economic news that came out. The markets in Europe are at their lowest level in 3 months. Latin American markets are mostly mixed. The only positive market there was the Chilean stock market. Africa and the Middle East, mostly mixed as well. Nigeria taking the positive crown there. And then in the far, far east, mostly lower those markets. But we have the Hang Seng out of Hong Kong being the biggest loser of all. Bitcoin and cryptocurrency news, not a whole lot of crypto news. The movement overall, we've been in this bit of a range. It's down about 0.65% at just over 30,200. Typically how Bitcoin moves, right? It'll kind of be range bound, then all of a sudden it'll break out in one direction or the other. One of the things though that was really curious this week is that now we have a lot of US institutions that are applying for Bitcoin ETFs. It's really interesting to me because I don't know if you guys remember, I always reported the positive news and the negative news when it came to cryptos and Bitcoin, right? Because one thing is transparency. Two, I think the future is a little bit different than what a lot of people talk about. But it's really interesting to me to see how a lot of people now are starting to flip-flop when it comes to Bitcoin. For example, if you remember, Russia in the beginning was like, oh, we're going to ban it because, it's the mark of the devil and it's, people are laundering money, blah, blah, blah. And now after they went through this whole US is trying to completely block out Russia from everything. Remember all the corporations after Russia invaded Ukraine, they decided to leave. So they weaponized the US dollar essentially. Then Russia was like, maybe Bitcoin would be pretty cool to use instead of the dollar. Now it's the same thing that's happening, right? The Goldman Sachs CEO, if I'm not mistaken, Goldman Sachs being the most important financial institution in the United States. At first he was like, oh, it's horrible. It's only for money launderers and blah, blah, blah. And now it's like, well, Bitcoin is important. It's the future. And now they're applying for ETF. So it seems to me that what they were doing, and if you remember during the bank collapse saga that we had this year, they were like cleaning up the system. Remember Signature Bank, which was one of the banks that quote unquote failed out of New York. Bernie Frank, which was a previous senator that's on the board of this bank, talked about how they were financially solvent. They didn't have any problems money-wise. And really what happened was that the government was actually taking out all the banks that provided the crypto services, right? So to me, it's really convenient now. Now the biggest institutions are now coming out and trying to apply for Bitcoin ETFs and talking about how Bitcoin is positive and blah, 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 blah. I don't buy it. Bitcoin for the week, as I mentioned, you guys, down 0.65%, just a touch over 30,200. In commodities, the U.S. corn dominance is starting to fade as the global marketplace takes shape. Brazil has become one of the huge exporters of corn, especially to China. Brazil actually exported more corn than the U.S. for the second time ever. And we also have a situation where Mexico is starting to limit their passing legislation, or, they're talking about limiting the import of GMO corn, genetically modified corn. So Mexico doesn't want it because they live off of corn, tortillas, for example, right? The tacos, they're all made out of corn. So I find this to be really interesting because we kind of see everything that United States is dominant in, it's starting to kind of wane away, right? And the last piece of this is going to be the US dollar when the BRIC nations, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, they confirm that they're developing a gold-backed reserve currency. Now, if you didn't know, the BRICS countries now have a larger share of GDP, of the world GDP, meaning that their GDP is bigger than the G7, which at one point the G7 was the majority of the world. We're talking 50, 60, 70%. Now the BRICS countries have a bigger economy together than the G7 countries, just by a touch, but it's continuing to move in that direction. The crude for the week, both international and domestic, went up over 4.5%. This has to do with the dollar. Remember that most commodities and materials, raw materials, are listed in dollars. So if we have a situation where the dollar actually goes down, then a lot of these commodities and raw materials go up. Gold for the week went up 0.23% to $19.25. Silver went up 1.31% to just over $23. And in financial and banking news, the number of corporate bankruptcies in Germany has increased significantly to its highest level in 7 years. That's even worse than the pandemic. 7 years. So this was last month's data. So this is important because Germany is the fourth largest economy in the world, largest economy in Europe. Both South Korea's inflation and Thailand's inflation slowed for, South Korea was the fifth consecutive month. Thailand was the sixth consecutive month. South Korea, not one of the biggest economies in the world, but one of the biggest exporters in the world. I believe the number 6 or 7 on the list. Mortgage rates hit a 30-year high at 7.22% on Thursday, the highest point since early November. In 1 week alone, the extra payment that you would have had to make on a mortgage because the rates went up was over $80. So I have a mortgage on one of the places I bought that's about 3.2 or 3.3%. And if that same house I would have bought now at the same price with the higher interest rate, we're talking about almost double the amount of payments, right? So this is where we're at when it comes to the situation kind of in the globe right now, since we're so over financialized, so over indebted, everybody from consumers to states to cities to federal countries. It's just a situation where if the interest rates just go up a little bit, it just sends a huge, a ripple throughout the system because people just can't afford it anymore. And now add on top the situation with the inflation, where I'm sure you have seen your food bill, the grocery bill, go up by a lot more than 5 or 10% that they're reporting in the government, right? That's just, it's eating away at the economy. Indian refiners' payments to Russia and Argentinians' payments to IMF both have been in yuan. India now is importing 40% of its crude from Russia. And remember that a lot of the countries now are deciding to pay directly in their own currencies, when before what they always did was pay in dollars. It's called the petrodollar system. The United States made an agreement with Saudi Arabia where they would sell their oil in dollars. Everybody kind of became in the habit of selling it in dollars. So everybody basically needed dollars. Right? Now there's a situation where people are starting to ditch the dollar for their own currencies, especially, for example, these BRICS countries, because now they have bigger economies and bigger trade directly together than they do with the US. And so the problem is going to be when all of these dollars come back home, because if you didn't know, there are actually more dollars outside of the United States than inside of the United States. So what happens when everybody starts trading in their own direct currencies? They don't buy as many dollars anymore. They start selling them on the market. Remember, typical market dynamics, buy and sell. If everybody's selling something, the value of that something goes down. That's being the US dollar. So expect inflation to continue for longer than what the government is saying, at least. And we'll see how far we go until there's an actual collapse of the dollar. And another piece of political news, in less than 2.5 years, there have been over 1,800 world-class athletes with cardiac arrest or serious issues, more than 1,300 of them dead. Not weird at all. I'm sure it's just climate change. Those of you guys that are conspiracy theorists like me know exactly what I'm talking about. Economic news. The GDP now of 6 states in the South are actually bigger than the states in the Northeast. I thought this was really interesting because now the states, for example, like Texas, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee have a bigger economy together than the big states of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maine, New York, all these kind of established states or original states, let's call them. That's what happens when you go communist. When you go, the pizza ovens was the last straw. If you're gonna go after the pizzas in New York, we're moving to Florida. I think Joe Rogan this week. I think in the podcast he had with Ice Cube, he said, if I end up in Florida, the empire's on the way out because Florida's the last stand. Eurozone PMI, which is the purchase manufacturing index, showed a contraction in June. This means that basically the economy in Europe is not doing well at all. And United States companies created far more jobs in June in the private sector, more than double the expectation than what the consensus was. So this is another piece of information that's going to show the Fed, the United States Central Bank, well, the economy is actually doing pretty good and they're going to continue to raise rates. This is why the markets went down, right? Because of that expectation. Huge Tesla news. They went up over 6.9%, lifting the S&P 500 positive after they delivered a record number of deliveries in the spring. They reported an 83% increase in deliveries, much more than the analysts expected. Their earnings are coming out on the 19th, so about 10 days from now. Mercedes is now the next company that says they're going to adopt the new system, the plug-in chargers from Tesla, and also access their superchargers as well. Remember, before Ford and GM were one of the first ones to announce this. I believe Mazda already announced this as well. So it seems like everybody's moving in Tesla's favor, at least in North America. Rivian, which is another electric vehicle maker, mostly trucks and SUVs, they went up over 14% on Friday after they also reported better than expected deliveries. And McDonald's in India removed tomatoes from burgers and wraps because of the escasez, there's a Spanish word, they can't find tomatoes anymore in the market. Supply shortages, that's what I was looking for in English. The prices of the staples in India went up almost 300% in a month to a record high. And you see how, I originally started talking about this in 2020. If you guys have been following me for a while, and some of you guys that have come to the seminars and stuff at DTA, I've been talking about this for a long time. But you can see how we're starting to see all these things kind of come together, right? We had the droughts in California that were affecting the almonds, and then we had the peaches in Georgia shortages. Then we have the problem with the oranges and the strawberries in Florida. Then the olive oil in Spain. It's like it's all starting to add up little by little, and eventually it's going to add up to a lot. Samsung Electronics fell over 2% after they showed a steep drop in operating profit. They had a computer chip glut. Basically, their profit fell over 90% in the first quarter, and the second quarter they're looking at a drop of about 22% year over year. Trade news: Erdogan is said to be pressing Russia to extend the Black Sea grain deal by at least another 3 months. If you guys remember, Russia blocked the exports of grains from Ukraine, which is known as the breadbasket of Europe because they produce so much food for Europe and a lot of the northern African countries. So then Russia just blocked the ports of Ukraine because the United States blocked everything basically from Russia. So Erdogan, the president of Turkey, came in and made an agreement to allow them to export through the Black Sea, and he's looking to make that an extension, most likely because they have a lot of friends in the northern African countries that they want to make sure they get fed. Technology, this is where the meat and bones of this week was. Nadine, which is a new social robot powered by AI to give more human-like gestures and expressions, could have an important future role to play by tending to the sick and the elderly, according to the professor who helped develop it. They put the GPT-3 AI model into the robot, and now they're saying they're going to be a lot more effective because obviously people need to sleep and eat, and robots do not. It's literally going to be like all the movies where the robots have killed us if you remember, because they're programming them with these communist ideals. And soon, when there's the next lockdown, the robots are going to be like, "Oh, you can't go outside for your health." And then when you try to go outside, he's going to make you sit down because he can see where you're at in your own house through the router. I'm gonna go all Alex Jones on this video. Meta Threads, it's a new competition, a new competitor to Twitter, signed up over 30 million people in about 18 hours. The only trick here is that you're basically selling your soul just like TikTok. And also you can't delete your Threads account unless you delete your Instagram account. So keep in mind, I deleted my Twitter because it's just getting a little bit too toxic. They took advantage of all the users on Instagram, and now Musk is threatening legal action, claiming that former employees of Twitter helped set up the platform. Aleph Aeronautics, which is supported by SpaceX, which is another company by Elon Musk, are starting to developing, I should say, a flying car that can go 110 miles in range. It's about the same size of a normal car. It could land and drive in the same spots, and it's going to be sold for $300,000, and the first deliveries are going to be in 2025. Although if it's on the same timetable as Elon Musk always says deliveries are, it's probably going to be more like 2030. Joke. So it's called the Model A, pre-sale in October, and they're going to develop a larger model called the Model Z, a 4-person sedan that they want to start producing in 2035. And they want to price it at $35,000, or maybe that was a typo. It might be $350,000 because that $35,000 for a flying car seems a little bit cheap. Last Friday was the busiest day in U.S. aviation history, so it doesn't seem like people are hurting when it comes to traveling. That was because of the July 4th weekend, and scientists have used Wi-Fi routers and AI to see through walls. Listen to this, able to map Wi-Fi signals to UV coordinates, allowing creation of a 3D model of a person's shape and pose. They definitely won't abuse that in the future. Prepare yourself. International events. U.S. Navy said on Wednesday that they intervened Iran from seizing 2 commercial tankers in the Gulf of Iran. This has been the latest series of attacks and an escalation since 2019. And do you guys remember what happened from 2019 to 20? What changed in the U.S.? World recorded the hottest day ever since records began to be kept in 1978. I wonder if the Earth would be hotter from the heat wave that was in Europe from the 1200s or 1300s. They're always convenient, right? They always search from the perfect date to say, oh, it's a record from since this date, whatever, but they never share the rest of the data, which is, I think, really interesting. Average temperature was 63 degrees Fahrenheit, 17.2 degrees Celsius. This has to do with the heat waves that we're seeing in the United States and China. France on full lockdown. They blocked off the internet, and the General Assembly approved the usage and the activation of microphones and phone and cameras on people's phones without their permission. So France has been lost. And other than that, and the interesting facts this week, the new New Zealand curriculum doesn't include any physics, biology, or chemistry because obviously it's racist. That's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember, the preppers were right.